This is the tutorial for the Hove Dress by Sussex Seamstress. We're going to start off showing you the facings. Here we are, that's my front facing, the squared off side, and this is the back facing, more scooped. You can see I've interfaced both pieces. Oops. And I've patchworked my interfacing as it's a non-woven one. Pinning them together at the shoulder seams, and I'll stitch them together with a centimetre seam allowance. My stitch length is usually 3 on my machine. That's one side and the other. There we go. Let's take the pins out. I'm going to press those seams open just because it's a bit less bulky. I'm using a double gauze here today, so it can be a little bit bulky at the seams. There we go, press them open, and I'm going to now overlock the outside edge. You can use a zigzag stitch if you don't have an overlocker. That's it, just nice and neat now. That's all ready to go onto the dress. So next let's look at these darts. I've transferred the bust point of my darts, the pointy bit, with a pin, and I've marked notches in my seam allowance to mark where the wide end of the dart is. So I'm going to match those notches up, pop a pin in to hold them together so that I'm not taking too much fabric out, and then I'm going to fold so it's a straight-ish line, and you can see there I'm going to taper from this wide point into the bust point, so you've got a little dart shape. And the same for the other side. So here we go, starting at the wider end, I'm tapering my dart into that end bust point there, and just coming straight off. I don't back tack the end because otherwise you can get a little bubble or a bobble there, and that's not very attractive on your boobs. I'm going to press that seam allowance downwards. You can usually see which way things need pressing because they will be shaped appropriately. As you can see, that works nicely on that side, and that seam allowance forms a nice line. I'm going to just stay stitch around this front neck because this fabric is likely to stretch. So again, I'm just doing it on a large stitch. This is a number 5 on my machine, and I'm just doing it inside the seam allowance so that I don't have to unpick it or take it out. So about 8mm in, but it just means that it will stay the right shape and hopefully not stretch. So next I'm going to do the shoulder seams. There we go, there's that front neck. Right sides together we want these. Incidentally, you can stay stitch your back neck too, you might want to do that. I haven't done it because it's a little bit smaller than the front, but it's a good idea too if you're worried about stretch. So I'm going to pin those shoulders, stitch them a centimetre from the edge again. Normal size stitch for this, which is my 3. So both shoulder seams stitched. Let's press these after we've overlocked that edge nicely. I just press them to one side in this fabric. You can press them open if you choose. So now we're going to put this facing onto the dress neckline. You can see I've pinned the shoulder seams already, and that facing fits really snugly now that we've put that stay stitching in. So I'm going to pin it all the way around, match those corners first. And then you'll see there's 2 little tiny notches there. You can just about see those. I'm going to match those to the notches on the dress neckline. That should help you navigate the curves a bit easier on this facing. So matching those up, popping a pin in. and I'm going to stitch the centimetre all the way around as usual, pivoting at those corner points on the front of the neck. Just take your time to do this. It will look so much nicer if it's a really nice smooth line that you've got for this neckline. There we go, all stitched. Take the pins out, and now it's just clipping and grading so that I can turn that facing through. So this is what I'm doing, I'm grading that facing. So the interfaced side, I'm just clipping down to about half the seam allowance there. Do that all the way around, and then you want to clip into your corners. You can always reinforce your corners by doing an extra stitch line exactly on top of the original one if you feel you need to. And then I'm going to trim that facing down again so that I can turn those and they'll be lovely crisp corners. Trimming away a little bit of excess seam allowance here, and I will clip into all the curves as well once I've trimmed all that down. So do that all the way around, and then you want to clip up to your stitch line all the way around. Okay, so now we want the facing pushed up towards your facing, so that seam allowance needs to go up, and you stitch right on the edge. So my seam allowance is pushed to the right here underneath that facing, and I'm just stitching on the edge of the facing to hold that seam allowance down. This will give you a lovely crisp neckline once it's all done. So there you go, you can see the seam allowance is pushed towards the facing there, lying nice and flat. I'm just running that stitch line around. There we go, so that's what it should look like on your facing when you're done. You might want to stop and start for your corners rather than try and go around the corner in one go, that's fine. So now we just tuck the facing in, give it a little press, and then I'm going to stitch in the ditch. I'm going to stitch between the front and back bodice right into that seam, just to hold the facing down. You can top stitch your facing as well, that looks quite nice, but I'm just doing it at the shoulders today. So another press for it, and it's, there you go, you can see, or can't see, the stitching disappears into the ditch. Side seams next. There's our neckline, and we're going to go down to the sides. I put the facing on while it's open because I think it's just easier to do it. Match those side seams, make sure that seam allowance for the dart again is downwards, line it all up together so they're all the same. So that dart edge is in alignment with your side seam, and you're going to stitch 1 centimetre from the edge again, both sides. There we go, so when you've stitched both sides, I'm going to overlock it or zigzag it, whichever way you choose to finish your seam. Lovely, that looks nice and smart, and then I'm going to turn it through and I will press that seam allowance towards the back. There we are, press it. Now we're going to put some gathering threads in our sleeves. Here we go. Now you can see I've got X marks the spot on my sleeve because you need a pair. So as this fabric doesn't have a right side or wrong side, checking my notches, I need to put an X on it so that I know that's the wrong side. I'm going to put my threads now 5mm and 10mm. So it's approximately 0.5 centimetre and 1 centimetre in. So it's 2 rows starting off with the one that's a centimetre in from the edge, and then I will just run another one around but halfway between that stitch line and the edge-ish. Doesn't have to be perfect or beautiful, it's just that you get a slightly more even gather, I think, if you do the 2 rows rather than just the 1. So there we go, that's the sleeve head. You should still be able to see your notches and balance marks. Yeah, there's the one at the top. So we're going to do the same on the cuff now. Great, so we've got gathering threads in our sleeve. So next we're going to do these seams. Here we go, remembering X marks the spot, that's my inside of my sleeve. So I'm going to put right sides together, match that underarm seam and stitch a centimetre down again. There we go. And I'm going to overlock that edge. Then we can turn it through. And I'll give that a quick press. Let's put these cuffs together now. Now I've interfaced my cuff because this fabric does stretch and I don't want it to. So I've turned up my centimetre seam allowance on one edge. It's clear which side's right side and wrong side. I'm going to just put those together and I'm going to stitch the centimetre seam allowance. You can do your cuffs wider than this if you feel a bit daunted by the narrowness of the binding. Just double it up and you'll find it might be a bit less fiddly. So there we go, I've got a circle, got my centimetre seam allowance, and I've just stitched through all of that. Okay, so let's put these cuffs onto the sleeve now. Here we go, I'll just check I've got my, yeah, got a pair, 2 notches, 1 notch. There we go, we know that this is the cuff end of the sleeve because it hasn't got the notches on it. I'm going to turn my cuff inside out so that we've got right sides to wrong sides of sleeve. Pin the underarm seams together. I'm going to roughly do a halfway point on each so that I get roughly the right amount of fabric in each half. Pin those, and then I'm going to gently tease these threads out a bit. There we go, so I can pull them and gather the cuff. You want to pull until the outer sleeve is fitting pretty snugly outside that cuff, so they should be about the same size. Let's pull that up a little bit more. How's that looking? Still a little bit more to go. Let's pull that up just a bit more and then we'll start to look at those gathers. Yeah, that's not bad, that's a good starting point. So you want to get these gathers as neatly and evenly spaced as possible. I like to have more puff on my outer sleeve, so I leave it quite ungathered under the arm, quite flat, so that I get a nice puff on my outer sleeve, but it's entirely up to you what you want to do. So there we go, we're pinning those and that fits beautifully, look, nice and snug inside our sleeve. And I'm just going to stitch pretty much on that gathering stitch there, a centimetre in as always, all the way around my cuff. There we go. You can always ease out those gathers. There we go. Let's have a look. Nice. Next we're going to fold our binding or our cuff edge up, look. So we've already got that nice crisp pressed edge. I'm going to fold it up and we're going to top stitch it. So I'm putting it under my machine. Do tack it or press it or whatever you need to do if you find this fiddly. And I'm literally just stitching on the edge of that pressed edge all the way around. So hopefully on the outside it looks all neat and any wobbly bits will be on the inside. There we are, that looks pretty neat and all wobbly on the inside, but no one will see that. So that's our cuff. Okay, let's put these sleeves in. This is basically the same process that you've just done for the cuffs, but slightly less fiddly because it's a larger area. So underarm seams, check which side I've got. I've got the back seam, 2 notches, front seam, 1 notch. Match those underarms. Pop a pin in there. Then you've got 1 notch and 1 notch for the front. And 2 notches for the back. That's how you know you've got your sleeve in the right way. And then that single one goes to the shoulder seam at the top. Okay, let's pull up these gathering threads again. Gathered sleeves are just the easiest sleeves to put in because they're gathered, so there's no trying to make them fit or easing things in. You literally just pull them up until they fit nice and snugly. So it's a nice easy sleeve. Again, I've done my puff at the top with a little bit on the sides, nothing under the arm. I don't want a puffy underarm, I want it all at the top of my shoulder. So I've just kind of evened them out along that area between the notches. But again, it's up to you wherever you choose to have them. So that fits nice and snugly inside, just need to stitch it. 1 centimetre from the edge, normal stitch, off we go. So basically stitching over that gathering stitch to ease out any of your gathers as you go. Just take those pins out and just neaten the edge with the overlocker or a zigzag. That looks really neat now. Turn it through, let's have a look at our magnificent sleeve. There you are, you can see I've got my puff at the top there. So next it's the skirt side seams, very straightforward. Place your skirts right side together. You should have a notch at the centre front and the centre back. That will help you with your gathers later. So I've placed my front and back right sides together and I'm just going to stitch this side seam 1 centimetre in from the edge and on the other side as well to form our skirt. There we go, quick whiz down the side seam. You can always put inseam pockets in if you want to. There's a lovely blog tutorial for that if you'd like to go and have a look at that on my website. Next I'm just going to overlock them and then I'll just press those to one side. So gathering threads into the top of this skirt now. Make sure you've got the smallest edge, which is the top of the skirt. It's broader at the bottom. You're experts at this by now. Big stitch, 1 centimetre in from the edge, and then another second row halfway between that stitch line and the edge. You may want to stop and start at each side seam, just because otherwise the gather threads get a bit long and a bit unwieldy. There we are, gather stitches in. Let's attach this bodice to the skirt now. So I've got my skirt inside out, I've got the wrong side outside. My bodice is right sides together with the skirt, so that's the inside of my bodice, that's the right side of my bodice, that's the right side of the skirt. I've got my quarter mark notches here, so I've joined my side seams. I'm putting a pin in the centre front and the centre back. You can fold your bodice in half, matching the side seams to find your centre front and centre back. The skirt doesn't have a back or a front, it's the same, so just go ahead and pin it to whichever. You can see there my side seams. So just to repeat, it's right side of bodice to right side of skirt. As it's not clear on this, as my fabric's the same both sides. Now I'm going to do that gathering again and just pull those threads around until the skirt fits quite snugly onto the bodice, and then I'll spend a little bit of time just trying to even out those gathers and make them look quite nice. It's worth taking a little bit of time at this stage to do that. They do look better if you can even them out a little bit before you start sewing. So we're all pinned all the way around. You can see the skirt is pretty snug to the bodice. I'm going to stitch on that gathering stitch, which is a centimetre in from the edge, and just stitch all the way around the waistline. I shall be having a fiddle with those gathers as I go, no doubt. Yeah, there we go. Just trying to get them to lie as flat as possible when I sew over them so they form a nice gather rather than a pleat. So there we go, that's our waistline stitched. So when we take these pins out, just need to finish off that raw edge. I'll give that a quick overlock. Much neater. And then this is the exciting bit because it actually looks like a dress. So when we turn it through, there you go, you can see all my nice neat gathers. And there's the neckline. So all that's left now is the hem. You can do this as deeply as you like, depending on how long you want your skirt to be or your dress to be. I'm just going to overlock and turn it up just about a centimetre. So that's a nice simple way to do it. Just stitch there. Off I go. If you've got a very light fabric, you might want to do a deeper hem or do a turn and turn hem just to give a little bit of weight to it so that it hangs a bit more nicely, but this is fine for my double gauze. So there we go. You have finished, or you should have finished your dress. It should look a bit like this one that you will see in a minute on the stand. Enjoy.